So this is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, part B of Friday, 23rd of April 2021. This is the front pages. These two front pages, the Guardian closing. So it actually talks about the amount of theft act by Cameron. And this is the Financial Times, which is typically kind of shielding Cameron from that particular sum. And the Times today is diverting, making excuses in the wrong time, too late, by blaming Cummings, who should have been blamed at the time he was doing this, not now. But this is contrived in order to give Johnson a way out from association with Cameron's Theft Act. Now, Theft Act is what we are talking about, act with a small c, Theft Act. But Theft Act also contains a lot of criminal activities, crimes, as defined in the 1968 Theft Act. So the Theft Acts, both spelled with both acts spelled with a capital and a lower key act, applied to Cameron. But that is something that Boris Johnson is implicated in, but is trying to deny implication by belatedly getting his chums in Fleet Street to focus on Dominic Cummings's overdoing of the tax. And the Daily Mail is running this stupid, overdone heading, RIP, that is rest in peace, common sense. I mean, this is a right-wing plug by the right-wing, racist, corrupt Daily Mail. Now, this is something that is, again, done in a semi-honest way. And it is about India's COVID tsunami. India's COVID tsunami, but not in the headline. It's not Narendra Modi's tsunami, but it is Narendra Modi's tsunami. It exposes Narendra Modi as the lying, incompetent, dysfunctional, corrupt, reactionary, cruel abuser of India's democracy. He is not accountable because the Nehru family has murdered the opposition, and the regional state level kind of disasters are not being sufficiently measured and acted on by the state governments that are not BJP controlled. But the BJP is spreading hatred right across India. And as we said earlier, previously, it's closing in on Bangladesh. Tripura is on the Bangladesh border. And it is BJP controlled, and the Assam is very much the field of activities by the hateful BJP, which is inciting hatred against Bangladesh and Muslims by targeting West Bengal. So the Modi is focusing on anti-Muslim hatred right across India, while he is exposing increasing numbers of Indians to massacres by COVID-19 negligence, incompetence, failures, and corruption and abuse of the resources that Modi is selling a lot of medical resources in the world market instead of letting Indians benefit from the treatment and care. And Cameron's Theft Act is there given inside page treatment by the Daily Mail. Of course, that is the correct heading. But the Daily Mail is still not asking for national war on the criminal Cameron. Daily Mail would have declared war itself if Jeremy Corbyn had done anything 1,000th time less lethal and criminal than Cameron's crimes. We diagnose the Fleet Street in this short reference, but that is absolutely correct. So Cameron took over a rogue government fronted by himself to take over England, the Bank of England, and rob the Bank of England and rob the country. And Murdoch's scum, daily scum, is also doing the Cummings diversion. It's not Cameron's £20 billion theft act that should have been on the front page. But it's a belated diversion, blaming Dominic Cummings for sending too many texts. It's the same Cummings who Johnson repeatedly backed and stood by and supported when Cummings should have been condemned and exposed for breaking the lockdown rules. And they've got 2-page spread on Dominic Cummings, and no such spread so far that we can see about Cameron's theft. And the Murdoch's come under an exclusive tag, says that Richard Madley is being tipped to be taking the spot left apparently vacant by the racist Piers Morgan. And there is no reference to the racism that Richard Madley has been perpetrating and been involved in for decades. Richard Madley, the news is bad because Madley will make racist remarks and cause problems for the ITV. And the I newspaper is also running the front page on Cameron's Theft Act concerning the Bank of England. And there is an Indian named Church of England rector in the city of London that has been given a token space in the letters page by the racistly edited letters page. And this is by Reverend Arani Sen. After 25 reports by the Church of England over the past 35 years, the Archbishop's Anti-Racism Task Force report rightly focuses on action for Christians to repent is to acknowledge sin and change direction. It is not enough to say sorry. This must lead to changed structures. It is not enough to set targets, for example, to shortlist people of color. If we do not actually see the fruits of this, namely diversity in senior roles, the task force report rightly speaks of removing obstacles and changing procedures. But despite this Church of England being the national church, it does not have a single diocesan bishop of color at present, and no voice of cultural diversity in the House of Lords. That said, co-opting 10 people from ethnic minority backgrounds onto the General Synod will bring a different voice and change the narrative so that Racism, and diversity are not appendices, but are integral to creating a truly healthy church. That's absolute pack of absolute rubbish, done in order to further his own career or her own career, whoever the writer is, whether it's a man or a woman. And Dyson is featured as the handler of Boris Johnson by Peter Brooks in his cartoon Today, which is absolutely correct. It is correct to the point that a cartoonist can only do so much. And this says that this Johnson really helps me clean up. This Johnson is coughing up the money that is coming out of Johnson's kind of face. That is Dyson using Boris Johnson. Dyson is the one that was accused by a woman of Iran, an Iranian origin Muslim woman, 35 years old, an engineer, who was kind of granted a complaint by a tribunal against Dyson's company. And that was based on the racist anti-Muslim behavior towards the woman, Muslim woman, by an Indian origin employee in the Dyson company. And Dyson himself capitulated and colluded with the anti-Muslim behavior of that Indian-born person employed by Dyson. Okay, so we've done the general headline look at the Guardian and the Financial Times, both of them. Well, Financial Times, Guardian, and the I newspaper, both of them doing the correct, accurate kind of reports in headline form, but none of them, including the Financial Times, as I said before, in part A, is referring to the criminal law. They're referring to the Guardian is referring to the Cabinet Office launching an investigation. And this piece, the investigation having been launched into leaked text from Boris Johnson's phone to the billionaire James Dyson. The Prime Minister promised to fix a tax issue as the company pitched to develop ventilators at the height of the pandemic. Now, Johnson, of course, is slippery. I mean, he is the slipperiest of the operators, the corrupt operators in the Conservative Party at the present time. So, the reason why he is slipperiest is because every time he is caught without his clothes, he's allowed, some kind of mysteriously, he's allowed to wriggle out of it by the media not pursuing the story. That's the reason. It's not him. Because he could not get away with even a tenth of the amount of criminal behavior, illegal behavior that he has been allowed to get away with already by the mysterious tolerance of his corruption and criminality by Fleet Street. And that includes the Guardian, that includes the Daily Mirror, neither of which is supposed to be supporting or supportive of the Conservatives. And the Guardian's so-called sketch writer, John Crace, C-R-A-C-E. It's spelled almost like Grace, the difference being the C instead of the G. So he's using the very same phrase about Cameron the crook that Dennis Skinner, also known as the Beast of Bolsover, was kicked out of the House of Commons for using Dodgy Dave, the phrase, against Cameron when Cameron was Prime Minister. And the then Speaker, John Barker, kicked Skinner out of the House of Commons for calling David Cameron Dodgy Dave. Now today, John Crace is reviving that phrase. Dodgy Dave's guide to lobbying. If at first you don't succeed, try it on, then try it on again. So it says it more or less what John Crace is saying. So this is a column that this one is. This one is the Crace one, calling Dodgy Dave as Dennis Skinner had called him. And it appears that Dennis Skinner, in terms of headlines, had got his heading on Cameron absolutely correct. Spot on, Dodgy Dave. So that's the Indian tsunami. Shall be looking at the Indian tsunami in a minute. Because the recognition by the British press and Fleet Street that India is going through a tsunami of COVID is something that is not usually found in the behavior of Fleet Street or the British media covering or coverage, or to put it correctly, cover up or cover-ups about the many hundreds of millions of people being kept in permanent states of deprivation by the Indian government and Indian kind of regional governments as well. So we shall have a kind of longer look at today's Daily Mail, running this 2-page spread and using that explosive word, tsunami. This is written from Delhi, New Delhi, by a woman called Amrit Dillon. And this one reads, the first paragraph reads, the terror that blighted the final hours of Swapnil Rastogi's father, Raj, is something his son will never forget. That and his own desperation as he drove around Lucknow, the capital of India's populous Uttar Pradesh state, searching for a hospital bed. Earlier, he had managed to source precious oxygen from a friend as his father's coronavirus symptoms worsened. But it was not enough to save him. Raj, just 59, died in the back seat of Swapnil's car, leaving his grief-stricken son bewildered and angry in equal measure. Now, this is a state. Lucknow is the capital of Uttar Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh has been targeted by the fascist BJP and the Sena that have been the main armed brigades installing Narendra Modi in the post of Prime Minister in India. And mass gang rapes of Muslim women and gang rape and murders of Muslim girls and attacks on Muslims and murders of Muslims in the Uttar Pradesh state under any excuse. These are notorious events, and the media in Fleet Street don't cover. Even Indian media don't cover. And Amrit Dillon is a denier, despite the fact that her piece is written in this emotional language about this man who lost his father in Lucknow. And that is the main perspective, that the tsunami level and scale of the failure of the disaster has come about because Modi has been allowed impunity from truthful reporting and accountability. And as I said in the previous part, the Nehru family has murdered opposition politics in India for the last 20, 30 years. And Modi and the BJP are only in place, in post, in power, because of the Nehru family's own corrupt criminal role. And now their murderous silence, because they have murdered and created the silence of the opposition mainstream in India. And the other external factors include the impunity given to the fascist regime fronted by Modi by the United Nations and its agencies. The international agencies have not treated Modi and his murderous incompetence, negligence, and cruelty to the hundreds of millions of Indian people. They have not condemned, let alone taken any steps to stop Modi in his tracks. And the result is now that when the Kashmir people were disenfranchised from the fragile remnants of so-called democratic say by Modi 2 years ago, Fleet Street and the Western media and the Western governments completely ignored that. The numbers of people affected by the latest Kashmir violations by Modi and the BJP would be treated as equivalent to several wars if these were taken in any Western European country. For example, in Ukraine, if a fraction of the violations by India of the Kashmiri Muslims, if a fraction of the violations were done by the pro-Russian elements in Ukraine, then the entire Western world would be kind of halted, if you like, in suspense and demand action against the Russians, which should have happened against the Modi's regime, but didn't. There was not even a ripple. And Modi got away with that, not only testing the state of zero state of resistance so that he could carry out fuller, more vigorous and aggressive fascism affecting the rest of India, which he is in the middle of doing. And despite the fact that the Daily Mail calls it a riddle, why is it a riddle? It's not a riddle at all. It is obvious fact. And the Daily Mail is still refusing to accept the reality, the truth of Modi's deadly, disastrous, cruel regime in India. So they're colluding, they're appeasing Modi and the BJP. And this two-page spread on India's tsunami contains this paragraph. Against a backdrop of pictures of near empty COVID wards and news that temporary hospitals and isolation centers hastily erected during the first wave had been decommissioned, we started meeting outdoors in cafes and parks again. Yet a month later, here we are. Thousands are dying daily. And not just because of the virus alone, but because they cannot get life-saving treatment. India's health service, read again, India's health care system is on its knees. And the consequences have been, that was page 9, so we go on to page 10. And the page 10, continuing Amrit Dhillon's piece from Delhi, heart-rending. People are dying on park benches, in car parks, and in ambulances outside hospitals. For once, the rich are as helpless as the poor. In a country where money and connections could always ensure access to some of the best healthcare in the world, the second wave has come as a rude shock. Money has no currency now. And she says, belatedly, no, let's read the Modi bit in the last three paragraphs. Incredibly, Mr. Modi was due to visit West Bengal today for another political rally. Instead of staying in the capital to monitor the scourge that has engulfed the country. Belatedly, he cancelled it last night, but not before an impression of heartless indifference had been created. Well, it's not an impression, it's the reality about Modi. He is heartless. No wonder a customized image of Mr. Modi's party symbol, the orange lotus, is doing the rounds on Twitter. Instead of people emerging from the leaves, it shows the blazing orange flames of a funeral pyre. So that's the Indian tsunami, COVID-19 tsunami in India under Narendra Modi. And Modi, as I have said, is a fascist. He's fronting the fascist regime, and this fascist is the one that the Times, in the editorial earlier in the week, urged Johnson to meet urgently. Was the Times asking Boris Johnson to take tips on fascism and anti-Muslim hatred from Narendra Modi? The Times did not elaborate, but that is included in the package that the Times thinks Boris Johnson needs to engage in and indulge in. So the Times says that Boris Johnson should meet Modi. Well, let's see what the Daily Mail online is saying. Well, the Daily Mail's headline on the print edition about India's COVID tsunami is not there. At least I can't find it. What there is this online piece about race to reach Britain. Passengers from red-listed India scramble to fly to UK before hotel quarantine starts, with cost of tickets trebling and travelers flying on private jets over war zones in bid to make it before 4 a.m. deadline. The rich in India chartered $10,000 an hour private jets into Luton to beat hotel quarantine deadline starting today. Heathrow Airport refused requests for extra flights from India before countries added to COVID red list. The Asian nation reported a record 315,000 cases as the troublesome variant sweeps the subcontinent. Hospitals are running out of oxygen across India, and people are forced to keep dead bodies at home. Do you know who chartered the private jets? Email Martin Robinson, mailonline.co.uk, or email tips@dailymail.com. So the tsunami is not used in the online version of the Daily Mail. Now that is still capitulating to Narendra Modi. Despite Amrit Dhillon. And this is the strategic kind of differences or difference that is typical of the Daily Mail's operations, because some of the things that it says in the print version are not repeated or available on the online versions, and vice versa. And that is in order to hide its true kind of role in particular situations. The Daily Mail is not alone. I mean, the scum also does the same thing. And that shows the dishonesty dominating Fleet Street. And the piece, as I said, by Amrit Dhillon itself is inadequate and is not fully honest about the impact and the effect on people's lives that the fascist regime and fascist policies and anti-Muslim hatred agenda being pushed by Modi and BJP and the Sena are having on the very future of India. So we shall be continuing in the next edition.